Grand Teton National Park is certainly one of the most breathtaking landscapes in the country and is a photographer's dream. With no lack of amazing photography opportunities, the Tetons have even the most well-traveled photographers coming back again and again. In this video, I'm running through my best Grand Tetons National Park photography tips, my favorite locations, the settings I use, and my tips for the ways to get the best shot on your Grand Tetons National Park photography trip. Locations. All right, so number one, most important thing, before we even get into this, I have to say, you have to scout your locations. So do your research before you go. And then once you're there, actually physically go to the location and see it before shoot day. So that when you're there and you have the amazing light, you're not trying to figure out where to stand. You're not trying to figure out how to frame the shot. You've already got that kind of stuff figured out, and you're able to take advantage of the light while it's there. We'll talk about lighting for all these things in a separate section of the video farther down, because most of it's fairly similar throughout the whole valley, but we'll get into that, so stay tuned. But first of all, let's talk about locations. So Oxbow Bend, this is one of the most photographed locations, maybe in the country. It's certainly the most photographed location in Grand Teton National Park. One of the main things about Oxbow Bend is because it's so popular, it's super crowded. And so if you stay up by the parking area, you're gonna end up with people in your shot. One of the biggest tips I can give you is to get away from the people. Get down on the bank, put your feet in the water if you have to, get in those willows and start bushwhacking until you can find a spot where there's no people. You're gonna end up with better shots that way anyway, in my opinion. One of the ways that someone suggested to me to handle that was to get there when you're ready, get there as early as you can, get down on the bank and find your spot, get some shots down on the bank, and then once the crowd clears out, you can get the exact same shot as they did, just a little bit later in the morning, without all the people in it and without having to get there at 4 o'clock in the morning to save yourself a spot. Okay. Schwabacher's Landing is stop number 2. Probably one of the other super photographed locations in the park. In fact, I know it is one of the other super photographed locations in Grand Teton National Park. You'll get pretty classic reflections of the actual 3 Tetons. And one tip I can give you actually is to not even go to the main parking area. It'll be the second parking area on the road. You don't want to go there because it's going to be crowded. Go to the first one. I think personally the shot is better myself at the first parking lot, and we were there on a Saturday at sunrise on Labor Day weekend, and we did not have to share it with anybody. We had the whole place to ourselves, and 200 yards down the river at the other overlook, it was really, really, really crowded. And so we really felt lucky about having found that little secret spot. Thirdly, Mormon Row and the Molten Barn, another super crowded spot. You're going to want to get here early as well, or be prepared to kind of elbow your way in. And we did. We elbowed our way in. We were able to get a shot. It was fine, but it wasn't my favorite shot of the trip, and it certainly wasn't my favorite shot of a Mormon barn. So you'll find lots of videos about how to shoot Molten Barn. Let's talk about a different barn. Instead of going right onto the gravel road and following that road down to Molten Barn, keep going on that road just a little ways. Get out to where the bus turnaround is and look back, and you're gonna see a different barn, and you're gonna see an amazing shot where you have awesome opportunities to work with depth, to get really cool prairie foregrounds, to get the perspective of that small barn against the really, really big mountains. You've got a lot of really cool things you can work with, and if you're there and there are people, you can use the sagebrush to hide the people and the trees, and it's a lot easier to hide people without having to Photoshop if you're farther away. And you can always get that perspective. You can always move closer, but you're not competing with people way up close to the barn. You're not competing with people for parking spaces. You're kind of farther back. You've got a better perspective, and it's a different perspective. It's all about that unique perspective. Fourth, Snake River Overlook. So this is the classic Grand Teton shot, the Ansel Adams shot. This is it. It's really hard to get the exact shot that he got. Number one, because of his camera. He was working with a different format camera. The man's a genius. But you do want to go and try to get it. It's also really overgrown these days. This is what I got trying to replicate the shot. It was in the middle of the smoke in the middle of the day, and it's fairly impossible to get a good color shot there in the middle of the day, in my opinion, because it's so blown out. But the black and white ended up working all right for me because of the contrasting I could do. Anyway, so you can see what that is. It's really impossible, like I said, during the middle of the day, but in the morning, it's probably the best. You'll have fewer of those kind of shadows from the sun behind the mountains. That being said, I think Ansel Adams shot his during the afternoon because, again, the man's a genius. Fifth one, yeah, we're on 5. Yeah, 5, Taggart Lake. So Taggart Lake is a fairly large alpine lake, farther down the Tetons than Jenny and Strain and Lee Lakes up that way. It has amazing views of the Grand and Teton and Mount Owen, I believe, all 3, as well as sometimes Mount Moran if you're in the right spot. This is not a early morning shot. This is like a later mid-morning shot. I would not suggest getting here before 9:30 or so, because it actually is so in shadow that with the trees around it, the lake itself will be in shadow and the mountains will really not be very illuminated. And so you'll end up with a lot of shadows and a lot of kind of darker shots. And if you wait until the mid-morning, you're gonna have those bright white mountains with the bright blue lake in front of it. And it's gonna be way better. Trust me on that. Wait until mid-morning to get to that one, which gives you the opportunity to go to one of the other spots we've talked about beforehand. So fun facts. All right, number 6, and this is kind of the only real hiking based photography spot, but if you are looking for a place to get into an amazingly photographic canyon, Cascade Canyon is like hiking in the Alps. It's absolutely insane. You're hiking right along the base of the Grand and Mount Teton. It gives you the opportunity, if you do that hike, to hit both Inspiration Point and Hidden Falls. Inspiration Point actually is the only place I would suggest not shooting in the morning because you're actually shooting towards the east to get the view of Jackson Hole. But Cascade Canyon is absolutely beautiful. Here's a shot I got hiking there. It does have a ferry that rides, that you have to ride to get to it unless you're willing to do like 5-mile round trip to get to the trailhead around Jenny Lake, because it's on the other side of Jenny Lake from all the development. Let's talk about lighting. So lighting in the Tetons is actually fairly straightforward because the whole mountain range is situated north to south. I don't know how to visualize that, but north to south. So the sun rises to the east, and if you're looking at the mountains, the sun is always going to rise behind you, and it's always going to set in front of you, which makes the best time to shoot in the Tetons in the morning. You're exactly right. So because you're always going to have the sun rising behind you, you're going to have really great options for alpenglow as the sun comes up. You're going to have beautifully illuminated mountains that are not in shadow, they're not haloed. You're going to have a well-lit foreground, and you're going to have a lot of kind of dramatic, I should say, not drastic, more dramatic kind of light and shadow to play with. That's going to end up making the shot really nice. So you're going to want to go in the morning as much as possible. Oh, the other thing that we need to talk about is flat lighting. So the flat light is amazing because it lasts forever. We got like maybe 5 hours of straight shooting time between starting at 6 and going until about 11 o'clock, and it was all really flat light. You certainly have really good opportunities for lighting. You can hit all of the different spots in one morning and then, you know, kind of tick things off and go back and revisit places where you feel like you need a better shot or you didn't get the shot you wanted. It really offers a lot of opportunities. So don't fret about the light, but know that it's better in the morning. As far as camera settings, keep your ISO as low as possible. That's kind of just a DSLR tip in general. Keep your ISO as low as possible. You know, your ISO is your light bucket, and if you're not if there's not enough light in the environment to fill up the bucket, you're gonna end up with a lot of green. And so if it's a super dark situation and you're shooting handheld, you need to keep that shutter speed hot fast, up your ISO, so you can fill the bucket of light and not have all the grain that you would otherwise end up with. I try to keep my ISO as no higher than 400 just to minimize that grain, but if I had a really dark shot, then ISO is definitely going to be up to about 400 or so. Along with that, you don't want to get your f-stop any lower than 16. I kind of try to keep it in that 16 to 24 range because you're dealing with a lot of really fast, long distances, and you need to have that kind of deep focus setting. And then shutter speed, of course, is relative to handheld, or relative to the lighting situation, but if you're going to shoot handheld, you want to keep it faster than 1/50th of a second. If you're shooting with a tripod, or you know you're going to need to shoot a slower shutter speed than 1/50th of a second, then you can talk about changing that up. But for the most part, if you're shooting handheld, keep your shutter speed faster than 1/50th of a second. Okay, and last but not least, we got to talk about how to get the shot. Grand Teton National Park is one of the most over-photographed spots I have ever heard of. Be creative. Go and find a new angle. Move your feet. Get on the ground. Notice the elements that you have around to work with you. Place stuff in the foreground. So make sure that you have those three things. You need focal points, you need leading lines, and you need middle, foreground, and background to have a well-organized shot. So these are just a couple things that should be helpful as you're planning and actually going on your Grand Tetons National Park photography trip. Making sure you know your locations, that you've scouted your locations beforehand, that you know the lighting situation, that you know the right settings to use to capture the light, and that you're willing to make the effort to really organize the elements in your frame. You're gonna end up with some really good photos. It's such a beautiful landscape that it's almost impossible to come back with a bad photo, but these are ways to really get some of those more professional, cool results. So, without further ado, let me just take one last second to remind y'all to like this video, feed the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see y'all next week.